Main text of Zhang Eiling's Half-Life Chapter 3. On this day, Zhen, Shu Hui, and Manzin went to have dinner together again. They talked about Mr. Yi, who was in charge of general affairs in the factory, celebrating his birthday, and they gave 200 longevity bowls to everyone. Zhen said to Shu Hui, "You still gave me the money for the gift, right?" After saying that, he took out the money from his side and paid it back to him. Shu Hui smiled and said, "Are you going to celebrate your birthday today?" Zhen frowned and said, "I don't want to go, to be honest. I think this kind of thing is a bit boring." Shu Hui said with a smile, "Just be tactful. This is how things are done in this kind of society. There is no reason to say it. If you don't go, you will offend others." Zhen smiled and nodded, saying, "But I think there must be a lot of people there today. Maybe there will be no one if I don't go." Pay attention. Shu Hui also knew that Zhen's temper had always been like this. He was very easygoing when he was easygoing, but he was also very stubborn when he was stubborn, so he just tried to persuade him and let it go. Manzin didn't say anything at the side. That night, Zhen and Shu Hui returned home and rested for a while. Shu Hui went to pay birthdays. Zhen suddenly remembered that Manzin was probably going to. With this thought in mind, without much thought, he pushed open the glass window and leaned toward the window, hoping to call Shu Hui to stop him when he passed by and go with him. However, after waiting for a long time, Shu Hui was not seen. He must have passed by long ago. The alley under the window was dark, and the spring night wind blew on people's faces, bringing a slight dampness. It seemed that it was warmer outside than inside the house. Sitting in the room, I feel cold all the time. The small room under the light looked small, empty, and messy. In fact, he has been accustomed to the desolate atmosphere of the guest house for a long time. But today, for some reason, I simply couldn't sit still for a moment. He suddenly wanted to see Manzin very urgently. After waiting for a while, he stood up and went out. When he walked to the street, he hired a car and went straight to the restaurant. Mystery's birthday party was held upstairs. As soon as he went upstairs, there was a two-drawer table leaning there, with pens, inkstones, and signature books placed on it. When Zhen saw it, he smiled unconsciously and thought, "I thought there were so many people today, and there was no way to check whoever came and who didn't come. Fortunately, I came." He picked up his pen and dipped it in the inkstone. Dip. It had been a long time since he had written with a brush. He had always lacked confidence in writing calligraphy, so he hesitated before putting pen to paper. At this time, a hand reached out from behind him, swiped the pen, and wiped the ink on his hand. Zhen was startled, and when he looked back, he never expected that it was Manzin. She had never joked with him like this before, and he was stunned. Manzin smiled and said, "Shu Hui is looking for you, come quickly." She hurriedly put her pen on the table, turned around and left. Zhen followed her in a daze. This place is a large open hall with more than a dozen tables and seats. In addition to colleagues from the factory, there are also many relatives and friends of Mr. Yi. It is impossible to see where Shu Hui is sitting. Manzin led him to the glass door leading to the balcony and stopped. Zhen looked up and saw that there was no one on the balcony, so he smiled and said, "Where's Shu Hui?" Manzin seemed a little embarrassed and said with a smile, "No, it's not that Shu Hui is looking for you. Just wait, I'm telling you, there's a reason." But it seemed like it was too difficult to explain. She didn't say why after talking for so long. Zhen couldn't help but be a little stunned. Manzin also knew that he had misunderstood, and couldn't help but blush, and became even more stunned and speechless. At this time, a colleague came over with a signature book and smiled at Zhen. "You forgot to sign." Zhen took off the fountain pen from his pocket and signed casually. The person held the book and laughed, but Manzin gently stamped his feet and laughed softly. "Oh no?" Zhen asked in surprise. "What's wrong?" Before Manzin could answer, he looked around after looking at it. He walked to the balcony. Zhen also followed him out. Manzin frowned and said with a smile, "I have already signed your name. I just heard you say you can't come. I want everyone to come. Maybe it's not good if you don't come alone." When Zhen heard this, he didn't know what to say. and he didn't know how to thank her. He could only look at her blankly and smile. Manzin felt a little embarrassed when he laughed, and turned around and leaned on the balcony railing. This restaurant is an old-fashioned Western-style building with bright lights upstairs and downstairs. On the balcony facing the street, the noise in the room can't be heard much, but the sound of the fists of the 5 kings and 8 horses downstairs can be heard very clearly. There is also the soft singing voice of the singing woman, and the babble of the huqin is played. Manzin turned her head and looked at him with a smile. "You can't tell me. Why are you here all of a sudden?" Zhen couldn't tell her because he wanted to see her. So he just smiled, was silent for a while, and then said, "I thought you and Shu Hui were both here, so I came." One of them was facing out, the other was facing in, both leaning on the railing. There is a moon tonight, slightly oblong. The moon looks like a white lotus seed, surrounded by a white haze of light. When people stand on the balcony, they cannot see the moonlight in the shadow of the electric lights. Only a large section of Manzin's exposed arms were seen bathing in the moonlight, which seemed to be particularly white. She was still wearing a dark blue cloth cheongsam today, with a light green short-sleeve sweater on top, and a row of rose on her chest. Green beads buttons. This is what she was wearing in the office today. Zhen looked at her and said with a smile, "You didn't go home. You came directly?" Manzin said with a smile, "Hey, look at me wearing a blue cloth coat. I don't look like I'm celebrating my birthday, right?" Just as he was talking, 2 colleagues in the room shouted to them, "Hey, you haven't come to dinner yet. And you still have to be invited." Manzin walked in with a busy smile, and Zhen also walked in. "Because there were so many people today, we adopted the system of eating as you come, and a banquet would be held as soon as a table was filled." There was a table full of people now, and everyone had already sat down. Of course, when they were seated, they all rushed to sit at the bottom, leaving the 2 seats at the top empty. Zhen and Manzin, the 2 latecomers, had no choice but to sit at the top. As soon as Zhen sat down, he had an idea. Sitting at the top like this, wouldn't it look like a bride and groom? He glanced at Manzin secretly. She might have the same feeling. She seemed embarrassed and never talked to him at the table. After the party, everyone said goodbye one after another. Zhen said to her, "I'll take you back." He had never been to her home yet, and this time, he said he would take her back. Although Manzin didn't refuse, but there seemed to be a tacit understanding between the 2 of them, and they would only deliver the goods to the entrance of the alley, and not go in. Since they didn't plan to go in, there was actually no point in sending them off. If they had taken a tram or bus, they could have talked on the way, but now they were alone in a rickshaw and couldn't even talk at all. However, I still have to give it away, as if there is also a kind of fun in it. Manzin's car drove ahead, and when it arrived at the entrance of her home, her car stopped first. Zhen always felt that her place was strictly guarded and no one was welcome. To show that he had absolutely no intention of entering, he rushed to pay the fare as soon as he got off the car, then nodded to her and smiled hurriedly. "Then let's see you tomorrow." As he said this, he turned to leave. Manzin smiled and said, "How about I invite you to come in and sit for a while? My house has been a mess these past 2 days because my sister is about to get married." Zhen was stunned for a moment and said with a smile, "Oh, your sister is getting married?" Manzin smiled and said, "Yes." Although the light from the street lamp was not very bright, you could still see a joyful expression between her eyebrows. When Zhen heard the news, he was also very happy. He knew her family's situation, and of course he was glad for her, that she had finally gotten rid of this relationship, and that her sister had found her home. He was silent for a while, then asked with a smile, "What kind of person is your brother-in-law?" Manzin said with a smile, "That man's surname is Shu, which means blessing Zhu. He lives on the exchange." Speaking of this, Manzin suddenly remembered that today her mother accompanied her sister to decorate the new house. I wonder if she has come back. If she happened to come back at this time, they saw her standing at the entrance of the alley talking to a man. I will ask long and short questions again later. Although it doesn't matter, it is not good after all. So she then said, "It's getting late. I'm going in," Shijin said. "Then I'm leaving." He left as soon as he said it, walked past several storefronts, looked back, and saw Manzin but still standing there. However, just as she was looking at it, she seemed to suddenly wake up, turned around and went in. Shijin stopped again and was stunned for a while. We met Zhao Chong the next day, but didn't hear her mention her sister's marriage again. Shijin has always been thinking about it. Not to mention anything else, it will be easier to interact with her from now on, and you can go to her home without having to worry about it. About a week later, she suddenly told Shu Hui that her sister had gotten married and the house at home was vacant and that she wanted to sublet it. She wanted them to pay attention and introduce them to anyone if they heard of anyone asking for a house. Shijin enthusiastically asked everyone he met if anyone was looking for a house. Soon I accompanied an indirect friend, a man named Wu, to Manzin's house to look at the house. It was his first time to step into this alley. He always felt a taboo about this place, so it felt a bit mysterious. This alley is in a very lively area. Along one side of the road are some storefront houses, with the plank doors removed from the store leaning against the back door one by one. A group of aunts and sisters gathered next to the public tap to wash rice and wash clothes, making the cement floor wet. There was a young lady inside who was washing her feet under the tap. She stood independently, raised one foot, and poured water on it. The toenails were all bright red and painted with cinnamon. That was what stood out. Shijin glanced at the little eldest sister and thought to himself, she didn't know she was a servant of the Gu family, serving Manzin's sister. The Gu family is number 5, and there is a rental notice posted at the back door. The door was ajar. Shijin knocked, but no one answered. Just as he was about to open the door and go in, there was a child sitting in the alley, playing in someone else's chartered car, and the footbell jingled. At this time, he jumped out of the car, rushed over, locked the door and asked, "Who are you looking for?" Shijin knew him as Manzin's younger brother, who had sent the keys to Shu Hui's house, but he didn't know Shijin. Shijin nodded and smiled at him and said, "Is your sister at home?" Shijin's question was not clear at first, but after hearing this, Jimin thought that this person was Manlu's former guest. Although he is a child, he is very sensitive in many places due to his environment. He has always felt disgusted with Manlu's friends, but he has never had a chance to vent. At this time, he shouted confidently, "She is not here anymore, she is married." Shijin smiled and said, "No, I mean your second sister." Jimin was stunned for a moment, because Manzin never had any friends. Been to the house, he still thought that these two people came here to have fun. So he stared and said, "Why are you looking for her?" The child looked menacing, but in front of the Mr. Wu who came with him, he made the world Zhen was a little embarrassed. He smiled and said, "I'm her colleague, and we came to see the house." Jimin looked at him again, then turned around and followed him, shouting all the way, "Mom? Someone is coming to see the house." He didn't shout, "My sister went to call her mom," which shows that there is still a little hostility. Shijin didn't expect that he would be in so much trouble when he came to her home to find her. After a while, her mother came out and let them inside. Shijin nodded to her and asked again, "Is Manzin at home?" Her mother smiled and said, "At home. I asked Jimin to go up and call her." "What's your surname?" Shijin said, "My surname is Shen." Her mother smiled and said, "Oh, Mr. Shen is her colleague." She looked at his face carefully and felt a little disappointed when she saw that he was not the young man in the photo. There are 2 rooms downstairs, one large and one small, which have been vacated. When I looked over, I could only see the bare floor with a layer of dust floating on it. An empty room always looks big and small at the same time, like a square box. In short, it is completely unimaginable what it was like for Manzin's sister to live here in the past. Jimin went upstairs to call Manzin, but she delayed for a long time before coming down. It turned out that she had gone to change into a new dress. It was a short-sleeve silk cheongsam with a pink bottom that she had made for her sister's wedding. There are dark blue dots as big as mung beans printed on them. She would never wear this more delicate color before, because her sister had many friends coming in and out of the house. She always wore a blue shirt, not only for frugality, but also for a reason. A self-defense function. Now there are no such scruples. Zhen felt as if she had suddenly taken off her filial piety, which made people's eyes light up. Zhen introduced her to Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu said that the house faced the west and it might be too hot in spring. After a few perfunctory words, he said he would think about it later and said, "Then I'll take a step first. There are still a few places to visit." He left first. Manzin invited Zhen to sit upstairs for a while. She led him upstairs. There was a window halfway up the stairs. On the windowsill were several pairs of black cotton padded shoes, some for adults and some for children. They had been worn all winter and were left to bask in the sun. The late spring sun is warm, and the sky outside the window is light blue. Arriving upstairs, there was a room upstairs where her grandmother and several younger brothers and sisters lived. There were 2 large beds and a small iron bed. Manzin and Zhen sat down at a square table by the window. They didn't see a single person along the way, and her mother was nowhere to be found at this time. However, they could faintly hear coughing and hurried talking in the next room. People must have hid there. A young lady came in bringing tea, and it turned out to be the same one who had been washing her feet in the alley just now, with her toenails painted with cinnabar. She is probably the only remnant left of Manzin's sister. She was now barefoot and wearing a pair of half-worn hollowed-out leather shoes, a floral cheongsam on her body, and a pink celluloid clip in her hair. She came in with a smile and brought tea, saying, "Sir, please have some tea." She was extremely polite and thoughtful. When I went out, I closed the door behind me. Zhen noticed it and felt a little uneasy, not because of anything else, but it was not good to talk behind closed doors while being watched by her grandmother and mother. However, he was just a little embarrassed, but Manzin had another feeling. She thought that Abao was well-trained because he had been serving her sister. This made her feel very embarrassed. She immediately went to open the door, sat down to talk, and said, "Isn't that friend of yours too expensive?" Zhen said, "I don't think so. Shu Hui also lives in 2 rooms like this at home. The rent is expensive. It's almost the same as this. The room is not as bright as this one." Manzin smiled and said, "Are you sharing a room with Shu Hui?" Zhen said, Jimin brought in 2 bowls of sugar soup and eggs. When Manzin saw it, it was a bit unexpected. Of course, it was always made by her mother. There were 2 eggs in the guest's bowl and 1 egg in her bowl. His brother came in and put it on the table with a straight face, without looking at anyone, and turned around to leave. Manzin wanted to stop him, but he didn't even look back. Manzin smiled and said, "He is usually very diplomatic, but today he suddenly became embarrassed." Zhen knew the reason very well, but he did not try to tell him. He just smiled and said, "Why do you need to make some snacks? It's too troublesome." Manzin smiled and said, "Country snacks. You can eat whatever you want." While eating, Zhen asked, "What do you eat for breakfast in the morning?" Manzin said, "Eat porridge. What about you?" Zhen said, "Shu Hui's family also eats porridge, but it's just like this. Shu Hui's father is very hospitable. People often come to eat in the evening, and many people come and eat, which makes Shu Hui's mother exhausted. She has to get up before dawn to cook porridge for us in the morning. I really feel uncomfortable, so I often always come out without breakfast and eat 2 pairs of pancakes and fried dough sticks at the stall." Manzin nodded and said, "That's how it is when you live in other people's homes. You always feel a little wronged in some places." Zhen said, "Actually, in their home it's pretty good. Shu Hui's father and mother really treat me like one of their own. Otherwise I wouldn't be embarrassed to live there all the time." Manzin said, "How long have you not been home?" Zhen said, "It's been almost a year." Manzin said with a smile, "Don't you miss home?" Zhen said with a smile, "I'm really afraid of going back too. If I had this power in the future, I always want to take my mother out. My father has a bad relationship with her, and they always have quarrels." Manzin said, "Oh," Zhen said, "just for me. I feel sick. I'm very angry." Manzin said, "What's the matter?" Zhen said, "My father opened a leather goods shop, and he also did other businesses. In the past, when my brother was alive, he stayed at home after graduation. I helped my father and plan to continue doing it in the future. Later, my brother died and my father wanted me to take his place, but I was not interested in those things. I wanted to study engineering. My father was very angry and ignored me from then on. It happened later. When I entered college, I still relied on my mother to secretly support me with some money, so he was often in trouble at that time. Speaking of which, Manson also suffered from economic oppression when he was a student. On this point, everyone talked about it even more speculatively. Manson said, "You probably don't know many acquaintances in Shanghai, otherwise I have another thing to entrust you with." Zhen smiled and said, "What is it?" Manson said, "If you hear that you want to work part-time as a typist." "Yes, I really want to do 2 more hours after get off work. Teaching is also fine." Zhen looked at her for a while and smiled. "That would make you too tired, right?" Manson said with a smile. "It doesn't matter. Most of the time in the office is just sitting for nothing. And if you come out and work for an hour or 2, it doesn't matter." Zhen also knew that once her sister got married, her burden would become even heavier. Even if her friends have the power to help her, it is not something she can accept. The only way to help is to find trouble for her. However, he paid attention to her for quite some time, but to no avail. One day she told him, "I originally said I would find something after 6 o'clock, but now I want to change it to after dinner." Zhen said, "After dinner? Isn't it too late?" Manson said with a smile, "I have found something before dinner." Zhen said, "Hey, you can't do this. Rushing here and there all day long will really make you sick. You don't know, at your age, you can't do this. It's easy to get lung disease." Manson said with a smile, "At your age, it seems like you are already older." She soon found her second job. After a busy summer, although she lost some weight, she was always in good spirits. Because Zhen lived in Shu Hui's house and disturbed them all year round, he always bought something for Shu Hui's parents during the New Year and holidays. The gift he gave him during the Mid-Autumn Festival this year was bought by Manson. A pure wool scarf was given to Shu Hui's father, and a woolen robe material was given to Shu Hui's mother. He had given Mrs. Zhu a piece of clothing before, but he had never seen her make it and wear it. He thought it was because the color he chose was not generous enough for an elderly person to wear it. In fact, Mrs. Zhu looks no more than middle-aged. She must have been a beauty in the past, and Shu Hui looked more like her than his father. His father, Zhu Yufang, was a fat man in his 40s or 50s, and he still looked like a fat, dark boy. Yufang works in a bank because he has a bit of a celebrity temperament and is not good at flattering. So he still does a small job in the clerical department until he is old, and he doesn't mind. On this day, everyone was appreciating the gifts from Zhen. When Yufang saw the material, he said, "Take it to the tailor shop right away and start making it. Don't put it away in the box again." Mrs. Zhu smiled and said, "I want to dress like that." "Why are you pretty? Going out with you will make you look like a shabby old errand. If others see it, they will think that this woman is overbearing and spends all the money on herself." She turned around and said to the world again. Zhen said, "You don't know his temper. If you ask him to make clothes, he always refuses to do it." Yufang laughed and said, "I just thought about it. Anyway, I will only look like this no matter how I dress up, and I can't be more beautiful. So I am still more interested in eating." When he mentioned eating, he said to his wife, "I wonder what new things are on the market in the past 2 days. I will go to the market with you tomorrow." His wife said, "Don't go there. You can buy whatever you see later. How much money should I save for the festival?" Yufang said, "Actually, if you want to eat good food, you don't have to eat it on the festival day. It's only expensive on the festival day. So why join in the fun?" His wife still insisted on the secular view and said, "Festivals have to be celebrated." The problem of whether to celebrate the festival or not turned out to be solved for them by others. A friend came to their house to borrow money. He had an urgent need and borrowed almost all of Yufang's newly received salary. This man was also a colleague of Yufang for many years. He came this day and chatted for a while. Zhen saw that he looked like he had something to say, so he walked out and went back to his room. After a while, Mrs. Su came outside his room to move her briquette stove and called him. Zhen, Uncle Zhu is making yellow croaker noodle soup. Command eat too? Zhen smiled. He agreed and followed. Yufang was there, fists and sleeves rolled up, ready to cook on the stove, and said to the guests, "Come to my place, and you will eat whatever you have. I will never cost you an extra ocean, so you can rest assured." In addition to noodles, there are also cold dishes. Yufang's cooking skills are the most conceited in his life. But as a master chef, he still needs 2 knives to prepare everything for him, cutting everything into shreds and mincing. So Zhu Feng, my wife, is still busy. Moreover, Yufang was meticulous in cooking, with various raw materials occupying many different plates and spreading them all over the room. The guests have been gone for a long time, but Mrs. Zhu is still there washing dishes. She bought this fish this morning because Shu Hui said she wanted to eat fish. Now that the middle section of the big fish was removed, she still put the remaining head and tail together to look like a complete fish, put it on the cutting board, and prepared to fry it for dinner as planned. Command eat. Shu Hui came back and was surprised when he saw it. He said, "Why is this fish's head so big?" Yufang said, "This fish is short." Mrs. Su couldn't help but laugh. Shu Hui put his hands in his trouser pockets, revealing the wool vest he was wearing underneath. The gray wool was dotted with white dots like snow beads. His mother asked, "Is your vest new? Is it machine wear upon or patterned?" Shu Hui said, "It's patterned." Mrs. Su said, "Oh, who made it patterned for you?" Shu Hui said, "Miss Gu, you don't know her." Mrs. Su said, "I know Harrison at Miss Gu, your colleague." Manzin originally told Zhen that she wanted to make him a vest, but she was always very considerate, so she wear upon one for Shu Hui. She always carries a ball of wool in the pocket of her sweater, and she keeps waving it with her hands when she goes to eat in a small restaurant. The one belonging to Shu Hui was tied up first, and he wore it out first. His mother noticed that she might have been a little neurotic because she was overly concerned about her son's affairs, which added to her worries. At that time, she kept it in mind and didn't say anything. Shu Hui's whereabouts are elusive, and it is simply impossible for a mother to pinpoint him and have a few words of confidence with him. But Zhen, Mrs. Su got along well with him. She deliberately wanted to find an opportunity to talk to him and inquire about Shu Hui's current situation from him. Because when children reach a certain age, parents are so far apart from them that they become closer friends. The next day was a Sunday. Shu Hui went out, and his father also went to see friends. The postman delivered a letter. When Mrs. Su saw that it was from Zhen's home, she sent it to his room. Zhen opened the letter and read it in front of her. She leaned on the door frame, watched him read the letter, and asked, "You are from Nanjing, right? How are you, old lady?" Zhen nodded and said, "She said she wanted to come to Shanghai for a visit." Mrs. Su smiled and said, "You old ladies are in such good spirits." Zhen frowned and said with a smile, "I think she is still worried because I have never been back. I want to visit Shanghai. In fact, I want to go back. I want to write a letter to tell her that she doesn't need to come. It's a lot of trouble for her to go out, and she's not used to staying in a hotel." Mrs. Su sighed. "No wonder she is thinking about you. She is the only child like you. You are alone in Shanghai, so don't blame her for being worried. Didn't she urge you to get married earlier?" Zhen, after a pause, she smiled and said, "My mother is very open-minded about this. It's also because she suffered the hardships of an old-style marriage, so she doesn't interfere with me." Mrs. Su nodded and said, "That's right. In today's world, it's not okay for parents to interfere. Don't talk about it, like you old lady and you. One is in Nanjing and the other is in Shanghai. What's the use of living in the same house like Shu Hui and I? He has a daughter outside, friend. How can he tell us?" Zhen said with a smile, "Then if he really has a marriage partner, he will never refuse to tell us." Mrs. Su smiled and said nothing, and after a while, she said again, "Your colleague has Miss Gu. Who is she?" Zhen was stunned for a moment, and immediately blushed for some reason, and said, "Gu Manzin. She is a very nice person, but she and Shu Hui, they're just ordinary friends." Mrs. Su said dubiously, thinking that at least that lady was very kind to Shu Hui. Otherwise she wouldn't be able to tie a woolen vest for him. Unless she is ugly, Shu Hui is not interested in her. Yun laughed again and said, "She looks ugly, right?" Shijin couldn't help but smile and said, "No, she is not ugly, but I do know that she and Shu Hui are just ordinary friends." He himself also I feel that his last sentence is very weak and does not guarantee the possibility of Shu Hui and Manzan's union at all. Even if Mrs. Su is suspicious, she still needs to be suspicious. Just let her be. Shijin wrote a letter to his mother, promising that he would come back soon. His mother was very happy and wrote another letter asking him to invite Shu Hui to come with her. Shijin knew that his mother must have been living in Shu Hui's house because he had been living there. She wanted to see what kind of person his friend was and whether he had a bad influence on him. He asked Shu Hui if he would like to visit Nanjing. This year's Double 10 festival happens to be on a Friday, which is connected with the weekend, giving a total of 3 days off. They decided to take this opportunity to have fun for 2 days. On the eve of departure, it was already dinner, and Shu Hui put on his coat again and ran out. Mrs. Su knew that he had a girlfriend calling just now, so she said, "I have to go out so late. And I have to get up early to catch the train tomorrow." Shu Hui said, "I will be back soon. A friend has to things, ask me to take it to Nanjing. I'll go get it." Mrs. Su said, "Hey, how big is the thing? Can it be packed down? I've already packed your box for you." She was still mumbling there. By then, Shu Hui had already disappeared without a trace. He had only been gone for a while, but he came back. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, he shouted up, "Hey, we have a guest." It turned out that it was Manzan who came. He met her at the entrance of the alley, so he accompanied her again. She came in together. Manzan smiled and said, "Aren't you going out? You go ahead, really, it doesn't matter. I have nothing to do. I brought you some snacks to eat on the way." Shu Hui said, "What do you do? Why do you still need to buy something?" He led her upstairs together. On the stairs, there was a clothes drying rope nailed to the wall by other tenants. It was full of diapers, and a rope was led diagonally all the way upstairs. At the top of the stairs are briquette stoves, empty soap boxes, and oil barrels. Shanghai's houses often have several families living in them, often forming such a three-dimensional courtyard. Shu Hui usually wears a crisp suit when he goes out. People would never expect that his home is like this, he himself was thinking. This is Manzan. It doesn't matter. He has a girlfriend with a younger temperament, but he can't bring her home. When he walked to the door of the third-floor room, he put on a humorous smile, stretched out his hand vaguely inside, and said with a smile, "Please, please." Looking in from the door, he saw a hanging on the wall in front of him. A few paintings and calligraphy, and a ham. Shu Hui's father was washing dishes and chopsticks under the lamp. He placed a wash basin on a square table in the middle, and he was washing dishes while swinging in the wash basin. He was the one washing dishes today, because his wife was busy quilting cotton-padded jackets after dinner. They also have two children studying in the north. The weather in the north gets cold early. To make their cotton-padded jackets, they have to give them to them. They sent it. When Mrs. Su saw the visitor, she heard that it was Miss Gu and knew that it was the maker of the woolen vest. She felt a little panicked for some reason. She stood up with a smile and offered her seat, muttering, "Look at me. She's covered in cotton." He was just busy patting the cotton on her clothes. Su Yufeng was wearing a bronze double-breasted coat at home. Although he was usually so nonchalant, the arrival of such a young woman made him extremely embarrassed, so he quickly added a long gown. Shijin also came over at this time. Mrs. Su smiled and said, "Have Miss Gu eaten?" Manzan said with a smile, "Yes." Shu Hui sat with her for a while, and Manzan urged him to leave again, so he left. Yufeng remained silent until now and asked his wife, "Where did Shu Hui go?" Although his wife knew that Shu Hui had gone to his girlfriend's house, she paid attention at that time and was very tactful. She replied, "I don't know, I only heard him say he would be back soon." "Miss Gu, please sit down for a while. It's really a mess here. Why don't you go sit in the room over there?" She gave up the guest. "Go to Shu Hui and Shijin's room. Let Shijin accompany you." and then walk away. Mrs. Zhu also brought over the cup of tea she had just made for Manzin. Shijin picked up the hot water bottle to add some boiling water and turned on the lamp. Manzin saw an alarm clock on the table, took it over and asked, "What time will you get on the train tomorrow morning?" Shijin said, "It's a 7 o'clock train." Manzin said, "Set the alarm clock to 5 o'clock. Clock, right?" She turned on the clock, and the rattling sound revealed the silence in the room. Shijin said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to come today. Why did you buy some snacks?" Manzin said with a smile, "Hey, didn't you mean to make Anzu get up before dawn to cook porridge for you in the morning? You don't feel satisfied. I thought you would get on the train tomorrow. And it would be early, so you would not want to trouble others. And you would end up at the station hungry, so I brought some food." When she said this, she couldn't let Mrs. Zhu and the others hear her, so her voice was naturally very low. Shijin came over to listen. She was sitting there and he was standing very close. At that moment, he seemed to be standing on the edge of a beautiful deep pool. He felt a little palpitated and at the same time felt waves of rippling in his heart. She had finished her words long ago, and he hadn't left yet. Maybe it was just a moment, but he already felt that he had stayed too long. And she must have felt the same, because she could see a little blush on her face under the light. Eager to break the situation, she said, "You forgot to cover the hot water bottle." Shijin turned around and saw that the hot water bottle was steaming like a chimney. He had forgotten to pour boiling water just now. "Geishang, I don't know why I am so distracted today." He smiled and went over to cover it. Manzin asked, "Have you packed your suitcase?" Shijin said with a smile, "I don't bring many things." He had a suitcase on the bed. Manzin walked over, lifted the lid of the suitcase and took a look. "It's a mess inside." She smiled and said, "Let me clean it up for you. Don't let your family say that you can't even take care of the box, let alone leave you alone outside." Shijin was thinking at that time, she would do it for him. "I'm afraid it's not appropriate to unpack the box, as others will see you and gossip." However, he couldn't think of the right words to stop her. There was something strange about Manzin. She was very shy when she was shy. And she was very naive when she was innocent. And she was not a naive person, nor was she a shy person. This contradiction of hers is really puzzling. Seeing that he was silent for a long time, Manzin asked, "What are you thinking about there?" Shijin smiled and said, "Huh?" He couldn't answer, and saw her folding a shirt there, and then he said casually, "By the time I come back, my vest will probably be ready, right?" Manzin said with a smile, "Can you definitely come back on Monday?" Shijin said with a smile, "I will definitely come back on Monday." "No, I don't want to take leave for anything necessary." Manzin said, "You haven't been back for a while, so your family must keep you here for a few more days." Shijin smiled and said, "No." The lid of the box suddenly snapped down automatically and was pressed against the back of Manzin's hand. After holding him up for a while, he took it down again. Shijin went to hold the lid of the box for her. He sat next to her, watching his shirt, tie and socks pass through her hands, and he had a strange feeling. Mrs. Zhu brought 2 plates of candies and said with a smile, "Ms. Gu, eat some candies." "Hey, are you taking care of the box for Shijin?" Shijin noticed that Mrs. Zhu had put on a clean dress, and her face was she seemed to have put on some powder, as if she was ready to come here to chat with the guests. However, she did not sit down in the end, and left again after saying a few perfunctory words. Manzin said, "You won't bring your raincoat with you?" Shijin said, "I don't think so. It might just happen to rain, so we'll be there for 2 days." Manzin said, "You'll have to do it on Monday. Are you coming back?" After the words were spoken, she remembered what she had just said and started laughing. Amid this burst of laughter, he hurriedly closed the box, picked up his purse, and said, "I'm leaving." Seeing her like that, Shijin seemed quite embarrassed, and was inconvenient to keep her. So he just said, "It's still early, no, sit for a while longer?" Manzin said with a smile, "No, you can go to bed early, I'm leaving." Shijin said with a smile, "You don't wait until Shu Hui comes back. Manzin said with a smile. I won't wait. Shijin sent her downstairs. She passed Mrs. Zhu's room and said goodbye to Mrs. Zhu and his wife at the door. Mrs. Zhu sent her to the front door and repeatedly asked her to come and play when she was free. After closing the door, Mrs. Zhu said to Shijin, Miss Gu is so nice and good-looking. She praised Manzin to him, as if she had a new understanding of their relationship. And Shijin felt that a little embarrassed. He just obeyed and said nothing. When he returned to the room, his original intention was to get ready to go to bed early. To make the bed, he had to take off the box on the bed, but in the end he sat down on the edge of the bed, opened the box to look at it, and closed it again. Now, I have no idea and I am very bored. Finally, he stood up again, locked the box, and carried it from the bed to the ground. He put the key in his pocket, touched a pack of cigarettes in the bag with his fingers, took it out, took out one and lit it. Now that I've lit it, I have to finish smoking this one before going to bed. Look at the clock. It's almost 11 o'clock. Shu Hui hasn't come back yet. In the dead of night, one could hear Shu Hui's mother turning her hand-operated sewing machine in her room. She was probably waiting to open the door for Shu Hui, otherwise she would have fallen asleep at this time. Shijin finished smoking a cigarette and felt a little dry, so he went to get a glass of boiled water to drink. His hand touched the lid of the thermos bottle, but the metal lid was hot. He was shocked. It turned out that the cork inside was not plugged in, so the heat kept coming out, making the lid so hot. The water inside has become cold. He didn't know why he was so confused today. First, he forgot to cap the thermos bottle. After capping it, he forgot to plug the cork inside. Manzin may have noticed it at the time, but he had already reminded him once and was embarrassed to say it again. When Shijin thought of this, even though he was drinking cold water, his face became hot. Someone was whistling outside the window. It must be Shu Hui. Shu Hui sometimes likes to whistle instead of knocking on the door, because it is cold at night. He puts his hands in his coat pocket and is too lazy to take them out. Shijin thought to himself that Mrs. Zhu might not be able to hear her as she was working on the sewing machine there. Since he was not asleep yet, he might as well go down and open the door. He walked out and passed by the door of Mrs. Zhu's room, only to hear Mrs. Zhu talking there. Although her voice was very low, no matter who it was, it would always be a bit shocking when they heard their own name, so there was no reason why they should not hear it. Mrs. Zhu said with a smile, I can't believe that a quiet and honest boss like Shijin would steal Shu Hui's girlfriend. Yu Fang was not one to whisper. It sounded like a loud bell. He said, that boy Shu Hui, he just has a mouth. How can he be worthy of me? This old gentleman had only met Manzin briefly, but he had a very good impression of her. That was fine, but his low opinion of his son made his wife unhappy. She didn't have an interface, so she started making a sewing machine again. Shijin used the sound of the machine as a cover to run up the 3 stairs and ran back to his room. He only now came back to what Mrs. Zhu said just now. Mrs. Zhu completely misunderstood the relationship between the 3 of them. However, when he heard her words, besides feeling 100 things wrong, his chaotic mood was also mixed with a trace of joy, so he couldn't tell what it was like. Shu Hui was still whistling outside the upstairs window and knocking on the door.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.